So what do you understand by the term mandatory with regards to the death penalty?
Mandatory death penalty, meaning to say that the death sentence will have to be imposed by the law because it's in the statute, and so the judge does not have the discretion to give something else other than the death sentence.
So do you agree with the mandatory death penalty?
Well, I would say that judges should be given a certain degree of discretion with respect to the punishment that they're going to mete out. But then again, the flip side to that would be that if there's too much discretion, no judge will ever impose the death penalty because no one wants to be an executioner, right? And if that's the case, then there'll never be the death sentence being like practically carried out in Singapore.
So as a citizen, do you agree with it, given of what you said?
I would say that I agree in general with the death penalty being a suitable punishment for major offences like murder. And I wouldn't advocate anything different because I think it works for our country.
For what offences do you think the death penalty should be the mandatory death penalty should be applied to?
I would say mostly for murder, but as for drug-related offences, maybe we could do something about that because I think sometimes where people are being like made scapegoats for trafficking, right, and they still get the mandatory death sentence, then it's probably a little harsh in that respect. But yeah, then again, I guess it's all policy. Yeah.
What do you understand by the term mandatory with regards to the death penalty?
Means that I understand it to mean that once you are convicted of a certain offence, the judge has no discretion but to sentence you to death if the penalty for that particular offence is death. Yeah.
Do you agree with the mandatory death penalty?
I think that it depends on the particular offence that you're talking about. Yeah.
Personally, why do you think drug offences shouldn't be applied to in this case?
Because I think that if I understand it correctly, I might be wrong. Even though I'm a law student, I'm not a very good law student. Yeah, I understand that in Singapore, possession carries a presumption of trafficking, and trafficking beyond a certain amount for certain drugs carries the death penalty. So sometimes because one of the principles of criminal law is the harm principle, and if you talk about a person who, let's give a hypothetical example of someone who is just a drug addict who has no intention of trafficking whatsoever, he may be caught under this provision, this presumption, yeah. And then he may be, even though he has not harmed anyone else. So in that case, if you adopt Mill's principle of harm to society, then I think that there's no justification for the death penalty in this particular instance, yeah.
What do you understand by the term mandatory with regards to the death penalty?
Mandatory means it's compulsory. There's no choice.
So do you agree with the mandatory death penalty in Singapore?
No.
Why?
Because I believe in rehabilitation, and everyone should be given a second chance, and you shouldn't take away someone's life just because he has committed a mistake. Yeah.
What about you?
I think it's a yes. Depends on the offence that is committed. Because I think things like drug offences, then perhaps that one, probably the person has to be given a second chance. But for like things like murdering someone, I don't think that's really pardonable. Yeah.
Do you know the exact amount of drugs that you can be convicted for with regards to the death penalty?
I can't remember the exact amount, but I think it's quite a small amount. Yeah.
Quite a small amount. With regards to the type of drug or in general?
There's different classes of drugs, yeah.
So do you know?
No, we have to refer to the Act.
What do you understand by the term mandatory with regards to the death penalty?
By mandatory, they mean that for certain offences, it's the only prescribed mode of punishment, so there's no discretion to reduce the punishment in order to match the moral culpability of the offender.
Do you agree with the mandatory death penalty in Singapore?
No.
Why?
I feel that it's an extremely archaic form of punishment, and it's so disjunct with the kind of morals that we are holding today, I mean, it's completely unnecessary for also. And apart from that, I think that most of these offences, it's not how do I say this? Like for instance, let's just compare two different offences which they have actually mandatory death penalty, like for trafficking of drugs and for murder. Like I suppose a case could be made possibly for that of murder, but for offences such as trafficking drugs, I think there's clearly something wrong about that. Yeah.
Do you propose any alternative form of judicial punishment?
I think that a good first step for our legislation would to at least remove the mandatory requirement of the death penalty, so that at least that justice can be meted out according to the blameworthiness of the alleged offender. And for things like, I mean, just as I mentioned earlier, the Misuse of Drugs Act, punishment which is more tailored, something that is closer to what is actually the actual harm that is being caused. Yeah, I don't see why someone who is carrying a little bit more than the prescribed amount deserves to be punished any more than someone who has, committed the offence of rape or robbery, something like that.
What do you understand by the term mandatory with regards to the death penalty in Singapore?
It means that there's no once you do something that has a mandatory death penalty, you're put to death without any exception. There's no the sentence is not mitigated or anything. This is complete. Yeah.
Do you agree with it?
I guess towards mandatory, I think you have to consider. I disagree with the mandatory I guess, because I guess circumstances have to be taken into account.
Do you know the exact amount of drugs enough to convict you for a mandatory death penalty?
Yeah, somewhat 3 grams for heroin.
3 grams for heroin?
Oh, cocaine, sorry. Yeah.
3 grams for cocaine?
Yeah, above 3 grams would be trafficking. Yeah.
What do you guys understand by the term mandatory with regards to the death penalty in Singapore?
It means that this is the only punishment available for the offence that you're committing.
Yeah, and for mandatory, I think it means that the judges don't really have a choice. If you are convicted, as you're found guilty of this crime, then they won't have any choice but to award this punishment of death. Yeah.
Do you agree with the mandatory death penalty in Singapore?
Yes, actually, because we need to send a strong signal out to those people who are going to commit certain crimes. Like, for example, drug trafficking, murder. It's all about sending a very, very strong message that we don't want this sort of behaviour within our society.
Yeah, well, okay, I like to disagree with him a bit on that because I think the reason why judges are judges is because then they are a lot wiser and then they can make better choices. But if you don't give them a choice of how to award or what to award in this case, because it's already stipulated that the penalty is death, then you're taking away all of their power. And so for some instances I wouldn't agree, whereas for things like murder I'm fine with mandatory death penalties. But there are other instances, for example like drugs, where the mandatory death penalty should be reviewed. Yeah, I wouldn't say I disagree, but it should be reviewed.
Do you still stick with your stand?
Yeah, I mean, like the mandatory death penalty for, let's say, drugs, right? It's not like a blanket rule. It only applies to certain very dangerous drugs and to certain amounts which is above the limit. So yeah, there is still some form of control there in regards to certain cases which he feels needs to be reviewed.